there is a version of you that only exists after you lose everything. Not the polished version. Not the one with the job title, the bank balance, the people who return your calls. The other one. The one standing in the wreckage. Asking the only question that has ever mattered. Who am I, when nothing is left to prove it? Most people never find out. They spend their whole lives protected by circumstance, never tested, never broken open. And then one day, it happens. The job disappears. The marriage ends. The money runs out. The reputation you built for 20 years collapses in a single afternoon. You had a story about yourself. A quiet, unspoken story. I am someone who has it together. I am someone people respect. I am someone who is going somewhere. And in a single moment, that story stops holding. Here is the part almost no one tells you in advance. The pain of rock bottom is rarely just the loss itself. It's the disorientation that follows, the sudden absence of a self you thought was solid ground. You reach for the identity you used to stand on, and your hand closes around nothing. But here is the far harder truth, and also the more useful one. Rock bottom is not the end of the story. It is where the story actually begins. Because 2,000 years ago, a man lost everything he had built. His fortune. His position. His entire public life, the audience that had made him one of the most recognized voices in Rome. He was exiled to a barren island, cut off completely from the world that once knew his name, with no promise, no guarantee, that it would ever know him again. And what he did in that exile, in the silence, in the years with no clear ending, became one of the most quietly powerful blueprints for rebuilding a shattered life that has ever survived to reach US. His name was Seneca. And his story is not a tragedy. It's an instruction manual. Stay with this one. Because by the end, you'll understand exactly what to do the next time the floor disappears beneath you, and it will, eventually, disappear beneath all of US. The year is 41 AD. Rome is in chaos. Emperor Caligula has just been assassinated in a palace corridor, stabbed by his own guard. His uncle Claudius, a man few in Rome had ever taken seriously, mocked for years as unfit to rule, has been thrust onto the throne almost by accident. A new emperor who feels unstable in his own power is a dangerous thing to be near. Claudius is nervous. Paranoid. Surrounded by advisors and a new wife's family eager to prove their loyalty the only way that reliably works in an unstable court, by finding enemies, and removing them. Seneca is one of the men they find. He is accused of adultery with Julia Livilla, the emperor's own niece, a sister of the recently murdered Caligula, and a woman with her own dangerous proximity to power. Historians still debate whether the charge was true or simply useful. A convenient accusation to remove a man whose intelligence, wit, and rising popularity in the Senate had begun to make certain people deeply uneasy. At this point in his life, Seneca was already known. Already respected. A gifted orator or writer whose essays circulated among Rome's most educated circles. A man, by any outward measure, who was exactly where he had spent his whole life trying to arrive. And then, in the span of what likely felt like a single trial, all of it is gone. The verdict comes quickly. Death, initially, reduced, under pressure from senators who still respected him, to something the court perhaps considered merciful. Exile. Seneca is sent to Corsica. Not the Corsica of postcards and vineyards. In the 1st century, Corsica was considered one of the harshest postings in the Roman world, mountainous, thick with fog, thin on comforts, isolated from the political and intellectual life that had defined Seneca's entire identity. Think about what this actually meant for him. Seneca was not a soldier. He was not built for hardship in the physical sense. He was a philosopher, or writer, a man accustomed to the Senate floor, to libraries, to the company of Rome's sharpest minds, to being listened to. And now, he is alone. Stripped of rank. Stripped of audience. Stripped of the version of himself that Rome had spent decades constructing, sentence by sentence, speech by speech. Imagine the specific texture of that loss. Not a single dramatic blow, but a slow daily erosion. Waking up on a cold, unfamiliar coastline, with no correspondence arriving, no invitations, no Senate to walk into, no certainty that anyone in Rome was still thinking of him at all. For 8 years. 8 years is not a metaphor. It is not a quick montage of hardship followed by triumphant return, the kind we're used to seeing compressed into a 2-minute film sequence. It is nearly a decade, 3,000 individual mornings, of a man sitting with the wreckage of his own life, with no confirmed date on which it might end. Consider what that does to a mind. Not a single test of character, passed once and moved past. A test repeated daily, for years, with no scoreboard, no applause, no way of knowing whether the effort was accomplishing anything at all. What we know, from Seneca's own surviving writing during this period, is not a man who collapsed into despair, nor one who pretended the pain wasn't real. During his exile, Seneca wrote 2 consolations that still survive today, one addressed to his own grieving mother, Helvia, and one addressed to Polybius, an influential freedman at Claudius's court. In the letter to his mother, Seneca does something remarkable. He does not minimize what has happened to him. He acknowledges the loss plainly, the discomfort, the distance, the disruption to a life he had built with such care. He never pretends the pain isn't real. But he turns the letter into an argument. A deliberate, structured, philosophical argument, built from the Stoic tradition he had studied for years, that his identity, his worth, his actual self, was never located in Rome, in status, or in physical comfort to begin with. The general thrust of his reasoning, paraphrased from the surviving text and translated across centuries, runs something like this: a change of location can strip a man of geography, of comfort, of company. But it cannot reach the parts of him that actually mattered, his judgment, his discipline, the quality of his thinking. Those were never dependent on Rome in the first place, and so they could not be exiled along with him. This was not empty comfort, offered from a safe distance. This was the load-bearing structure of his entire philosophy, under direct, sustained pressure, tested against the worst thing that had ever happened to him. It's worth pausing here on something important. We don't know every detail of Seneca's private suffering in those years. What survives is what he chose to commit to paper, and any honest account of this story has to hold that fact carefully rather than fill in the silence with invented certainty. But what we do know, from his own surviving words, is a man actively practicing philosophy under the worst conditions his life would ever produce, not as an abstract exercise for students, but as a survival tool for himself. He did not know, in year 3 or year 5, whether he would ever return. Historically, he had no guarantee. And yet the record shows a man who kept writing, kept thinking, kept practicing the very philosophy he would later become famous for, not because it earned him anything in exile, but because it was the only ground steady enough to stand on. In 49 AD, after nearly 8 years, Agrippina, Claudius's new wife, arranged his recall to Rome. Seneca was made a tutor to a young boy named Nero. The exile ended. But the man who returned was not the same one who left. Here's what almost everyone misses about this story. The tragedy was never the exile itself. The tragedy, if there is one, would have been if Seneca had let the loss of status convince him that he, personally, had been erased. That the man was the same thing as the position he'd held. He didn't. And that distinction is the entire hinge this story turns on. This is the psychological trap most people fall into after rock bottom. We confuse the collapse of our circumstances with the collapse of our identity. We treat the loss of a job, a marriage, a reputation, as evidence about who we fundamentally are, rather than evidence about what has simply, temporarily, changed around us. Modern psychology has a name for part of this. It's called identity fusion, when your sense of self becomes so tightly merged with an external role, a job, a relationship, a reputation, that losing the role feels indistinguishable from losing yourself. Seneca, without the language of modern psychology, was describing exactly this danger 2,000 years ago. His argument to his mother was, in essence, a deliberate act of unfusing. separating what happened to him from who he was. And this is the hidden mechanism behind every real comeback story you've ever heard. It never starts with new circumstances. It starts with a redefinition of the self that no longer depends on the circumstances that were just taken away. Think about why rock bottom feels so uniquely terrifying. It's not just the practical loss, the money, the position, the relationship. It's the silence that follows. The absence of external validation telling you who you are. For most of your life, the world hands you a mirror. Your job title. Your paycheck. The way people greet you at the door. The way your name sounds when someone introduces you at a dinner. And suddenly, at rock bottom, the mirror is gone. There's nothing reflecting anything back. Most people panic in that silence. They scramble to rebuild the external mirror as fast as possible. A new job, any job, a new relationship, any relationship, terrified of what they might see, or fail to see, without it. Seneca did the opposite. In the silence of Corsica, with no external mirror left to check himself against, he built an internal one. He didn't rush to reconstruct his old life. He spent years, instead, clarifying exactly what part of his old life had actually been him, and what part had simply been decoration Rome had hung around him. And that is the actual hidden lesson buried inside this 2,000-year-old exile. Rock bottom does not destroy your identity. It simply reveals how much of your identity was never truly yours to begin with, because it was borrowed. Borrowed from a title. Borrowed from a bank balance. Borrowed from other people's opinions, which can shift with a single afternoon's gossip. The version of you that remains, after everything external is stripped away, that is the only version that was ever actually solid. That is the only version worth building from. This is not a comforting bedtime idea. It's closer to an engineering principle. You cannot build a stable structure on ground that was never yours to build on. Rock bottom, for all its brutality, hands you something rare, a clear, undeniable view of exactly where the real ground is. So how do you actually do this? Not as an abstract idea, but as a daily practice, starting today. Step 1. The inventory of the unshakable. Take a piece of paper. Physically write this out, don't just think it. Divide it into 2 columns. In the first column, write everything that was just taken from you, or that you fear losing. The job. The money. The relationship. The reputation you spent years building. In the second column, write down what remains, even in the total, complete absence of everything in the first column. Your judgment. Your discipline. Your capacity to think clearly under pressure. Your integrity in how you treat people, even when no one is watching or rewarding you for it. Your ability to keep a commitment to yourself. This is not a comforting exercise. It is a diagnostic one. Look at column 1. Notice how much of it depends on other people, on markets, on timing, on things entirely outside your control. Now look at column 2. Notice how none of it does. Seneca's letter to his mother is, structurally, exactly this list, an extended argument for why the second column was always the real foundation of a life, and the first column was only ever furniture. Furniture matters. It makes a house comfortable. But it was never load-bearing. Do this daily for 1 week. Not once, then forgotten, daily, so it starts to reshape the automatic assumptions running underneath your panic. Watch how the fear slowly reorganizes around what's actually true, rather than what merely feels true in the first raw hours of loss. Step 2. The discipline of voluntary discomfort. The Stoics practiced something specific and deliberate, experiencing small, chosen versions of loss, before loss is forced on them by circumstance. Eating plain, simple food for a day, instead of what you're used to. Sleeping without the usual comforts. Going without something, heating, a phone, a convenience, that you normally rely on without a second thought. The purpose is not punishment, and it's not about proving toughness to anyone. It's rehearsal. A controlled exposure to scarcity, chosen deliberately, so the nervous system learns, through direct experience, not just an idea, that discomfort is survivable. When you have practiced discomfort on your own terms, rock bottom stops feeling like an entirely unfamiliar country when it eventually arrives, as it does for everyone at some point. You've already been there, briefly, voluntarily, and returned intact. It has measurably less power over you the second time, even if the second time wasn't your choice. Start small. One day this week, remove one comfort you currently take for granted completely, for a full 24 hours. Notice, honestly, what actually happens. Usually, far less than your anxiety predicted in advance. That gap, between the fear and the actual experience, is the entire point of the exercise. Step 3. Rebuild the internal mirror daily. Every evening, before sleep, ask yourself 3 questions. Out loud, or written down, the format matters less than the honesty. What did I do today that was actually within my control? Where did I act with integrity today, regardless of the outcome it produced? And what judgment, what old belief, am I still quietly carrying that isn't actually true anymore? This is a direct descendant of the nightly self-examination practiced by Stoics like Seneca himself, who wrote about reviewing the events of his own day each night before sleep, not to punish himself for failures, but to calibrate. To notice patterns. To catch small drifts in character before they became large ones. Notice what this practice does structurally. It shifts the source of your evaluation from external outcomes, which you don't fully control, to internal conduct, which you do. Over time, this is precisely how an internal mirror gets rebuilt, one honest evening at a time. Do this for 30 consecutive days, and you will notice something remarkable happening underneath the surface. Your sense of self will slowly stop requiring the world's confirmation to feel solid. It will start generating that stability on its own, from the inside, regardless of what column 1 of your life looks like on any given day. Step 4. Reframe the timeline. Seneca did not know, in year 3 of 8, that recall to Rome was ever coming. There was no visible finish line for him to count down toward. Neither do you know your own timeline right now, however much you wish you did. But here is what the Stoics understood, and what most people miss entirely in the middle of a crisis: the waiting itself is not wasted time, sitting empty until the real recovery finally begins. It is the training ground itself. Each day at rock bottom that you spend building the internal structure, the judgment, the discipline, the steadiness of character, is not a delay before your real life resumes on the other side. It is your real life. Right now. Being built, quietly, without an audience, without applause. This reframe changes everything about how the waiting feels. Instead of counting the days until things improve, start counting what you're building while they haven't improved yet. Stop measuring your worth by how fast you manage to escape the bottom. Start measuring it, instead, by exactly who you are becoming while you're still down there, because that person is the one who will actually walk back out, whenever the exit finally appears. Seneca spent 8 years on a cold, unfamiliar island, uncertain, for most of that time, if the life he knew would ever return to him. It did, eventually. He was recalled to Rome and given a position of real influence. But by the time it returned, he was no longer the man who needed it to. He had already found, in the silence of the exile, the ground that could never be taken from him again. That is the entire strategy. Not escaping rock bottom faster than everyone else. Not performing resilience for an audience. Not pretending it doesn't hurt, because it does, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of dishonesty. It is building, in the silence of the collapse, a self so steady that whatever comes next, external, uncertain, entirely unguaranteed, can never again reach far enough inside you to take it away. Rock bottom is not proof that you were never enough. It is the one place life ever shows you, without decoration, exactly what you're actually made of. If this changed the way you see your own rock bottom, subscribe. Because the next lesson from the ones who came before us, the ones who already walked through the exact fire you're standing in right now, might be exactly what gets you through yours.